Thank you for everybody for coming here, both in Sacramento and whoever's out in the rest of the world. So today we're giving a presentation on applications of the U.S. Geological Survey SPARROW model in California. And I'll be doing part of the presentation, and my colleague Dina Saleh will be doing some other parts. We'll be switching off during the talk. So now if I can figure out how to get to the next slide.
Okay, where it says 01.
Pardon?
Where it says 01, you have your toggles.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
Okay. So here's an outline of what we'll be doing today. We'll be talking about what this model actually is, some of the uses of the models, some of the data requirements, and then we'll show how we're going to be implementing this in California, and showing some examples from our national program where this has already been calibrated, and what our current activities are for what we're doing here in California. So SPARROW is sorry, somebody's helping me out with the computer again. All right. Excuse me just a second. We wanted to get the screen to be magnified in the right. I think we're right now. Okay, so SPARROW is an acronym for Spatially Referenced Regression on Watershed Attributes. It was developed by the U.S. Geological Survey in 1997, basically to help some of the water quality monitoring that we've been doing across the country. So help understand factors affecting water quality, examine statistics of sources and transport, and provide a means to estimate loads in unmonitored locations. So the NACA program, for example, we've had a little bit over 50 different watersheds throughout the country where we've been collecting data. In each of these 12 different monitoring locations where we've been collecting data, but we wanted to be able to get an idea of what was happening in whole watersheds with respect to different water quality constituents. And so in order to do that, we needed ways to extrapolate from the monitored locations to the unmonitored locations to be able to get a whole watershed idea of what's going on with these different constituents. So as I said, these SPARROW models can be built to various scales. People have calibrated these nationally, but they can also be done at the watershed scale. And so as you go from national to watershed, then hopefully the way your calibration is going to be more correct, give you a better idea of what's going on. And the constituents that have been successfully modeled so far in this include nitrogen and phosphorus. Those are most of the models that have been built. And nitrogen and phosphorus have been most successful because a lot of the water quality data that people have been collecting, a lot of those programs have been geared towards nitrogen and phosphorus across the country. But there's been also some models that have been built for suspended sediment and for organic carbon. And this is just an example on the slide here of some of the output from SPARROW, just showing like on a national model what streams are contributing, like how much load of nitrogen in this case, and how many metric tons and what locations are contributing those. So not too surprisingly, in the Midwest, where corn and soybeans are grown, you see it in red where the highest loads are. All right, so as I said, there are different uses that people have been making of the SPARROW model. The first one is to predict the mean annual flux in yield and concentration for these unmonitored streams, reaches, and watersheds. Assess the effects of hydrological and biochemical processes on transport and fate. So SPARROW incorporates a number of equations which have what we call land-to-water transport functions, which then help us to understand like what happens to nitrogen and phosphorus as it's moving across the watershed. Apportion stream loads to major nutrient sources and upstream watersheds. So basically what we're trying to do here is look at the various sources for these contaminants and then figure out which different land uses or which different processes are contributing to the movement of these chemicals as they move from upstream to downstream, whether it be a function of agricultural use or atmospheric deposition or some combination of the above. And then SPARROW then could be used to simulate water quality response to climate or land use changes. So all these, like temperature can be changed, the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that's used that could be simulated, and you can then predict what might happen to water quality as a response to that. And in different parts of the country where this has been implemented, so this has been a tool that some people have been using for TMDLs and to help develop nutrient criteria for different regions. So in this slide, this is kind of a conceptual model of what SPARROW is doing. We've got a landscape here with different activities going on, such as farming, urban, and we've got different processes going on, including application of fertilizer, atmospheric deposition, and there's different processes then which are going to cause, in this case, nitrogen or phosphorus to be moving across the landscape, and all these different arrows that are pointing here are going to have some effect on how much of the nitrogen and phosphorus might be appearing in the river at any one location. So, and then what's going to happen then is we have this movement to the streams. We're going to have downstream transport of either nitrogen and phosphorus or any constituent that we're have the SPARROW model calibrated for, and this then would be our one of our calibration points. So when we have water quality and flow, we can calibrate that part of the watershed for these types of different processes, and then from there extrapolate to the unmonitored parts of the watershed. Here's a mathematical form of the SPARROW. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but basically what we're doing here is we got the flux for upstream reaches, a function of the flow, the chemistry, and the relationship that we develop between discharge and concentration. And then we have flux of sources introduced to the stream network, and these could be either from point sources, agriculture, from the application of nitrogen and phosphorus, atmospheric deposition, and any other natural processes that might contribute to nitrogen and phosphorus. And these land-to-water delivery functions and aquatic transport then will help to account for what we see at our calibration points. So SPARROW then will do an optimization of these equations to calibrate the best statistical relationship that they can at the calibration points and do a similar type of calculation for the unmonitored locations. And this is just related to the last slide. We have our stream monitoring locations. This is from a slide that was developed for a national model. So back when they were developing this national model, they had all these different sites for the eastern United States, a fair distribution of sites in the Pacific Northwest, but different parts of the country with not too much data. But in the rest of the, but for all parts of the country, they had all these different data layers: precipitation, land use, soils, stream reservoir, and water velocity. Then that would have an impact on how these different chemicals are being moved and are part of the calibration procedure for SPARROW. So SPARROW itself then runs in the SAS programming language. What you start with then is in the national model they had 62,000 stream reaches. We now are using a more dense network of stream reaches based on the NHD Plus network. So for California, we have 134,000 or 136,000 stream reaches that would be either calibrated or predicted for the entire state. So the input to SPARROW then is the location of each of these different reaches. Some of these reaches are calibration points, but the vast majority of them are prediction reaches. And then for each reach, we have how much of these different input functions are put into SPARROW. And I think I forgot to say it in a previous slide, but the way we run this is not for a multitude of years, but we have to pick a base year to be able to run this model. So in this case for California, we picked the year 2002. And we picked 2002 because SPARROW is being implemented across the country by USGS. They started in the east, they're moving out to the west. And for national consistency, we picked 2002. Also, because we're dealing with nitrogen and phosphorus, the U.S. Department of Agricultural Statistics puts out their nitrogen and phosphorus uses on crops for every 5 years. So there was data for 2002. There was also data for 2007. But for national consistency, we're using 2002 as our base year for SPARROW. And then, as I said, once the model is run, the output from SPARROW then is input back into a geographic information system where one can see at what part of the watershed you're getting your different types of loads. And so once again, we're showing the Mississippi Basin here and showing what part of the Midwest is contributing the greatest amounts of loads to into the Gulf of Mexico. And on the right side of the screen, it just gives you an idea of the density of the stream network and how each of those different stream segments are being predicted by SPARROW for their individual load. And here's another example from another part of the country, from West Virginia, that shows a pie diagram showing what the land use was in this drainage. Here was a drainage of about 7,000 square kilometers, which is mostly forested with about 18% of farmland. And SPARROW predicts that most of the nitrogen load leaving this basin then comes from atmospheric deposition, and the rest apportioned as such. So it gives you an idea then of where the sources are geographically, and you can aggregate this to see like which of your different land uses or land covers are contributing the most of the contaminants. All right, so I'm going to take a break for a second, and we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit at this point about how we'd be implementing this in California. And Dina, Saleh will be giving this part of the talk.
Hello. So my name is Dina Saleh, and I've been working with the U.S. Geological Survey for about 12 years now. I'm a research hydrologist, and I've been working with Joe on this project. As Joe said before, this is a national project that we follow national criteria on the way we design this project. We are part of our basin is called Major River Basin 8. The project basically divided the nation into eight major river basins, and we're the last major river basin. Very difficult to see the screen. Okay, so this map just shows you our area. As most of California, a little bit of Oregon, just basically the Klamath Basin, and a little bit of Nevada. I'm showing here some of the basins that we're working with, just for reference. So we have the Klamath River Basin, Sacramento River Basin, Russian River, San Joaquin River Basin, and Santa Ana River Basin. So our model basically depends, SPARROW in general, depends on the NHD plus data set. It's if we can think of it as the blue line for the model. The NHD plus data set is the 1 to 100K scale. It's based on a 30-meter DEM. And the NHD plus data set is divided into two types of streams. The blue lines here show they call it the initiated streams, which are streams that have watershed identified with them. And then the green lines are considered uninitiated or uninitialized, which is basically the streams that are types that are canals, ditches, aqueducts, anything that cannot be assigned a watershed to. In our study area, we have 136,000 initialized streams, which are these streams that have watersheds. Once we start off with our NHD plus data set, then each one of those streams is assigned a watershed catchment. You can see to the left, that's basically a close-up of what's going on in the whole state. And every segment of the stream has a catchment. The catchment, so there's 136,000 catchments in our study area. Each catchment is assigned what's called a COM ID. The COM ID is basically what's going to connect all the different spatial layers in the model to each other. So they're all identified by that COM ID that goes into these catchments. So some of these are examples of some of the data that goes into the model. We have many different layers. I'm just showing some examples, actually, just 5 of them. Atmospheric deposition, so natural recharge. And this data was given to us through the national team. They put together all the data for the whole nation and divided by the basins in order for us to all have the same consistency in the type of data we're using and in the scale of data we're using. So we have also we have like nitrogen from manure, fertilizer application. We have temperatures. We have other data like we go in like geology, land use, soils, precipitation, all of it basically surrounding the 2002 base year.
Dina?
Yes.
Could you open up the microphone a little closer to you? We can't hear you.
Can you not hear me? Is it better now?
Better, much better. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so then once we have all our spatial layers, then what we need to have is we need to have some water quality sites, basically to form what Joe was talking about is our calibration points. We started off with 3 data sets. One of them was the first one we used was the red triangles, which is the NACA data set, and I'll tell you more about it in a minute. Then the white dots are the data that we obtained from our national team, and this basically was all the data that was available in SPARROW. So it would be some different agencies plus also some USGS data sets, and the green boxes are the DWR data sets. These data have to go through. They have to be checked to see if they meet the criteria of SPARROW. So unfortunately, with all those thousands of data sets that we had, we only came down with 124 sites that can be useful and used in SPARROW, because the data that needs to be used has to be span the 2-year base year that we have of 2002. They have to have at least 15 observations, and they have to be accompanied by a continuous flow record for those 2 years for calibration. Unfortunately, a lot of the data we got them from the national team went back to retrieve data from SPARROW all the way back to the 1800s. There was tons and tons of data that was or programs that were discontinued in the 1980s. So that data was all provided to us. The sites were all provided to us, but none of that data was available or spanned the year that we needed for the model calibration. So we couldn't use any of those sites. So we came up with 124 sites. And I wanted to mention here that the sites that we used from the NACA sites, basically there were 43 sites. They came from research that was done by my former colleague, Charlie Kratzer, who was a former USGS employee. And he did this really intensive paper, scientific investigation report for the USGS that looked at 30-year data for a lot of different nutrients, including total nitrogen and total phosphorus that we used in the model. And this paper has just been published. It's available online, and it's in the process of being printed. The best thing about it is it comes with a CD that has all this 30-year data from different agencies that we used to calculate loads and trends and yields for different areas in California for 3 major basins, which is Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Santa Ana. And this data, I have it in the handout I gave you. You can probably see the website. And if you're interested in having a copy of the paper, you could just let us know, and we can send you a copy. This fantastic work that was done, and it really needs to be addressed. So once we have our calibration sites, then the SPARROW model requires what you're doing with those sites is basically you're calculating a load that will be used for calibration for the SPARROW model. What we use here is what's called a Flux Master. Flux Master is a model that was developed by the U.S. Geological Survey by Schwartz and others in 2006. It's a log linear multi-regression model. It provides a detrended load. Basically, it's taking away the effect of time. So you're using a whole whatever time period you have of concentrations and flow that's available in order to calculate using a log linear method to calculate a load. Then you detrend it around the base year that you're using for your model development. So basically, it reports you data with only the time period you request, and then at this point, you can have it as daily, monthly, annual data. And at this point, we want it detrended over only the 2002 year base year for a model. So we have to run. This is a SAS program. Also, so once you collect all your water quality data and your flow data, we ran it through SAS, through Fluxmaster. Fluxmaster gives you a lot of outputs. One of them basically shows you the relationship for the residuals between predicted and observed concentrations. And this is for total nitrogen for one of our best sites. This basically, I was trying to sell this product to you, so I'm showing you our best site here. It's Sacramento River at Freeport. It shows a wonderful relationship. It gives you also an idea about some outliers out there. And then the next output that comes is this figure. It shows, and you can also get it as a tabulary data. It's basically gives you all your load on the time period of available data, your predicted concentrations, your observed concentrations. It also gives you a load trend. And also, if you could see, I'm not sure if you can see the black line, it shows that the detrending that goes through the data in order to take away, the effect of time, so you get that value. On the bottom, I'm sorry, this is the output from Flux directly. You could see that it gives you standard statistical results like standard error prediction and the direction of slope and trend, and that you could look at this to figure out how well the model is working to calculate your load for that site. So this one is showing 4.3%, which is excellent. As a rule of thumb in the U.S. Geological Survey, what we do is, and this is used a lot of different places also, is anything that has a standard error prediction between 0 and 30 is considered excellent. 30 and 50 is questionable, and anything over 50 we throw out. We consider it to be too different to be used for the model. Okay, so once we have all those, also what the Fluxmaster gives you is it gives you a tabulized, I'm sorry, the word, for output of loads for that year that you're telling it you want data for. If you want the whole time period, it will give you monthly or daily. If you want just that 2002 data, it gives it to you. You can plot it. You can look at right away on where your loads are coming from. And that can help you when you're building your SPARROW model. This is going to be used for calibrating your SPARROW model to know the major sources of these nutrients that are coming into your basin. The second layer that's important to get together besides the water quality is our point sources. And also we were able to get a database from EPA of all the facilities that are available in California. The facilities were divided, as you know, to major and minor. Anything that pumps out more than 1 million gallons per day of water is considered a major. And then they were divided by different types. And then what we have to do is we have to go and obtain either flow data or even better to have flow and concentration data of what they dump out in the streams. So we could be able to calculate a load for those points that will be also considered as calibration points for our SPARROW model. So for our study, we're able only to get 226 sites. 208 of them are majors and 19 are minors. We're still in the process of trying to get some data for the minors. We then take this data and apply a method called McMahon Method. Basically, it's a very simple relationship between flow and concentration. When flow and concentration is available, when concentration is not available and flow is available, it goes out basically and looks at the type of facility, the size of that facility, and then it comes to estimate what kind of nutrient output would come from that facility and give you a load. So then also it gives it to you in a table format. You can plot it and look at the main contributions of the load from these point sources. We could know in our study area, a lot of them are coming from wastewater treatment plants. Once all these layers are put together, so then we have all this information. So this is basically shows you a work flow chart for SPARROW. So we start off with our blueprint of NHD plus. Then an NHD plus it gives assigns a catchment for any streamline that is able to find a watershed for. Then you have your layers, your environmental data that you get from the national model. Then you have your monitoring data, which will be the point source loads and your water quality loads. You bring all this in a SAS program called Make Data One file, and it puts it into what's called the input data file for your SAS model. You bring it into SAS, you run it, you get your output, you calibrate, you evaluate it, you calibrate it, run and get it again. Basically, at this point, you will have the capability to change some of these knobs that will allow you to kind of take in consideration what is happening, what's going on, and what do you think is going on based on your calibration points, and have it kind of work, to make sense of what's going on in the model. That's what I have to show you, but Joe needs to show you some more examples on the national scale. So I will give it over to Joe.
So our national group of scientists that have been working on this, as I mentioned earlier, they started this in 1997. They have a number of different papers that have been published, either as USGS reports or in the scientific literature. And I'll give you an easy link for where to find that. Basically, I just wanted to finish up the talk and open it up for questions in a few minutes here, just to show a few other examples of some of the output from SPARROW. So as Dina mentioned, you're running the SPARROW then in the SAS program. The SAS program then is going to be providing these predicted values of nitrogen or phosphorus flux throughout the watershed that you're going to be modeling. And then that is easily put into a geographic information system that you can show it graphically. So in this slide here, we're showing like what the contribution of nitrogen was from atmospheric deposition in forests, what the contribution was for agriculture, and what the contributions are from urban sources. So conceivably, then, this would be useful information that somebody that maybe might be developing a TMDL, for example, for nitrogen and phosphorus, how they might be able to look at different sources and how those different sources then might affect the downstream water body. And in this case, the Chesapeake Bay then was one example of where they were able to successfully use this type of information to give them some information as to where the different sources were. And SPARROW then would give you also some information on the different yield of phosphorus from individual streams. And as I mentioned earlier, the yield, like say, to a coastal water, in this case, maybe the Chesapeake Bay, in the case of California, the Bay Delta. And here's just another example of a larger scale model for the Gulf of Mexico. Once again, showing a similar type of output, the incremental yield delivered to different streams and the total yield delivered to watershed outlets. There's somewhat of a one-to-one correspondence between what's going on to different streams and what's going to end up in the Gulf of Mexico, but it's not completely the same. And there's different processes that affect the transport of nitrogen to the Gulf. One of them is like stream velocity. Some streams move the nitrogen a lot more quicker than other streams, and those types of things can be understood from the running and understanding of the output from this model. Here's just another example showing, not surprisingly, the biggest contributions from corn and soybean growth to the Gulf of Mexico, and the relatively minor inputs from urban sources. And then I think Dina mentioned this a bit in her talk, but once you have a calibrated model, then you could do different things and say what happens if you change the amount of nitrogen that might be used on a particular farm in different areas, and where you might get your reductions in loads. And here's just an example of a slide here showing stream load response to a 30% reduction in nitrogen input to farms, and what parts of the watershed then would respond the most to that type of nitrogen reduction. And nationally, what our group is working on at USGS is a web-based tool whereby a calibrated model could then be brought up on a website, and then you could actually select different parts of a watershed or whole watersheds and run different scenarios on a web-based program for such as reductions in nitrogen input or different things like changes in climate, what happens when air water temperature increases, what happens to the transport of these different contaminants, what happens if farmers start using more nitrogen as a result of a larger growing season. So this web-based tool probably would be available within the next year or two for different parts of the country, but eventually it would actually be able to be used for the California example as well. And as I mentioned, there is an internet site for what we're doing with SPARROW. It can easily be found just by typing SPARROW into your search engine, and you'll find this site here. And basically every publication that has been made for SPARROW, the applications, different parts of the country are shown here. More technical information about the model, including exactly how these different land-to-water transport functions work, are available for an easy download from this website. So right now we're about halfway through to the point of actually being able to run this model. The largest time sink for getting this thing together is collecting all the data, the flow data, the chemistry data, and we have all the other different layers ready to go. And we'll be running this model in the rest of the summer, looking at the output. And then next year would be our year of interpretation and report writing on this. So within a year from now, we should have this, for the most part, pretty well wrapped up. And then hopefully what we could do with this is then use this as a tool to do some other research in the state. I mentioned a few of these different things here. What happens with the effects of climate change in California? For example, if temperatures change, we have a longer growing season. If farmers grow from a single crop to a double crop, what effect would that have on the delivery of nitrogen and phosphorus to streams? How that would affect the Bay Delta by having this increased load, if there is an increased load in nitrogen and phosphorus. We're hoping to simulate other types of constituents. We have quite a bit of data on organic carbon in the state. Organic carbon affects drinking water quality. That would be a nice constituent to be able to model with SPARROW if we have enough data to be able to have a model with that. And we're also hoping to look at suspended sediment in the future as well. And suspended sediment also is a good tool would be a good constituent to model with SPARROW, not only for knowing like where different sediment sources are, but a lot of different contaminants move with sediment. Mercury is one of those examples. There's other contaminants as well. So if you can get a calibrated model for sediment, then you have a chance of being able to understand how different contaminants associated with sediment might move through these different waterways as well. And also, as I mentioned a few times, hopefully this would be useful in supporting local and regional TMDL development for these different types of constituents. So that's the bulk of our talk here, and we have time for some questions. I think I'll start asking people in Sacramento if they have any questions. I'll repeat those to the people online, and then do vice versa with the people that are listening in.
Joe, for those that are online, you can send questions via the chat to presenter, or you can unmute yourself hitting *6 and ask Joe's question.
All right, what would be the easiest thing to do? That'll be to somebody's telling me an easier way to get questions from people online, but Eric, you said to push which button to?
Well, if people are muted, so if they want to unmute themselves, they have to hit *6.
Okay. So people online that are muted could ask questions by pushing *6 on their keyboard, I guess?
Or on their phone. On their phone.
On their phone, okay. All right, we'll start off with questions in Sacramento, and then we'll see if we can get any questions online after that. I think there was a question right here. All right, we expected a question like that, and we're hoping we weren't going to get a question like that. The question was, how do we deal with a complicated hydrology, as we have in California, with bypasses and canals and so on and so forth? And SPARROW can handle that type of hydrology by basically rerouting water as part of the model. So you have points of addition and points of removal. So you could have points of addition or removal at different places where water might be moving in and out of the rivers, showing up different places. So, for example, a constituent starting in the Sacramento River could be rerouted to Southern California as part of the model as well. When Dina showed her slide on the NHD plus system, all the sites that are initialized are easily handled by the model, but basically what you're asking for is how do we handle all those uninitialized sites where probably the bulk of the different constituents are moving. And basically by handling it through these points of addition and removal is how we would probably do it. And Dina, do you have to add? Anybody else in Sacramento? Over here.
Is that it for questions in Sacramento?
We had another question here in Sacramento, and basically the question was that for nitrogen in particular, nitrogen has a lot of different species, nitrite, nitrate, ammonia, and there's different processes that could happen as nitrogen is being moved, denitrification being one, particularly in the Midwest as a river goes into a reservoir. Reservoirs might become a source or sink of nitrogen, and how does the model handle that? Specifically, those are in part of the land to water transfer functions that are built into SPARROW, and it's also part of the process of running the model and then deciding whether or not the coefficients that we're using for those types of functions are appropriate for the area that we're modeling. And in some cases, denitrification, for example, might be more important than others. Some of those coefficients might have to be changed in order to get a better fit. Right now, we're modeling just total nitrogen and total phosphorus for no other better reason that I can give you other than the fact that the rest of the country in USGS is getting a calibrated model for the country for those two constituents, but there's really no reason why you couldn't run the model for individual constituents if there was a reason. Nitrate, for example, right now there's a lot of interest in the state with how ammonia moves into the delta and what effect that has on the ecology of the delta. Conceptually, that could be done by running these for individual constituents, and it's probably something we would consider for future work on the model. But right now, right now we have to get a good calibration on total nitrogen and total phosphorus in order to establish what we need nationally, and then from there we can take it and make a better look at what's going on for these individual components of the nitrogen cycle. Any other questions over here in Sacramento? No, when we say total, we mean everything being carried by the waterway. So, well, we're not dealing with bed load. We're dealing with what can be calibrated at a calibration site. So when somebody collects a water sample and sends it in for nitrogen or phosphorus analysis, typically they're taking a width depth integrated sample. It's not going to include the bed load. So that part of the cycle is not going to be part of that. But what's being carried within the dissolved and the suspended sediment load is what we'd be calibrating on. So for nitrogen, for example, you're going to have parts of the nitrogen species are going to be mainly dissolved, like nitrate. The organic part of nitrogen is going to be mainly in the suspended sediments. But it is in fact the total amount that makes up the dissolved and the suspended load, and the same would be true of phosphorus.
Are you still taking questions in Sacramento, Joe?
Yeah, we're still getting another question. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I don't know if everybody heard that online, but the question was that what we've been presenting here was a load model, but in many cases what you really want to understand is a concentration model, and one of the reasons that I could understand for that is that you want to know how the organisms are going to be affected by concentration at different parts of a watershed. In fact, the calibration on this, the way it works is that we're calibrating the stream against flow. We're calibrating it also against concentration. Then we're running a load model, but as part of the load model, you also can easily transform that data into predicted concentrations on a daily basis. So that can be done. Each of those would have a particular error associated with them as well, but we have done that on other types of studies that we've done in the past. So, for example, Dina and I recently wrote a paper on pesticide trends in the western United States, and we calibrated those models in a similar way. But then we were able to say, well, we've got these predicted daily concentrations for different pesticides, and how would those concentrations then translate into, like, say, a TMDL? And how often would, say, a river be in compliance with the TMDL based on those types of predictions? So yes, that type of output is available. It's probably one of the things we'll be looking at as we go through the interpretation of the data. But that is available as part of the output. Yeah, the question was that we've done national models of nitrogen and phosphorus, and the question was, have there been any other applications of this model on smaller watersheds? There have been some. I know there's been like a few master's or PhD dissertations that have been written. One that I recall was written with pathogens, for example. So conceptually, this can be done at any size of a watershed. But the key part is being able to have the data points distributed throughout the watershed in order to get a good calibration. There probably haven't been too many applications of this, but there have been some. Over here. Okay, question? Okay, that's a good point. And any other questions in Sacramento? One more here. Yeah, the question was, could the model be used by anybody outside of USGS? Conceptually, it could. As we mentioned, it's written right now in the SAS programming language. So if you had conceptually SAS on your computer, you could get a copy of the model. And then you could run it on your computer. If you had your data, you had your both flow and concentration data, then conceptually anybody can run it if they have the right software on their computer. But I believe that the actual model can be downloaded from the SPARROW website by anybody, but the key would be to have the SAS programming software on your computer to be able to run it, because that's critical to being able to, and of course the Geographic information system, which most people would have dealing with this type of thing anyway. So was there any questions for people listening in?
Yes, we have 6 people that have submitted questions via chat. So if you take a look at your chat box.
Yeah, hold on just a second, because I'm looking at full screen and I can't see the chat box. I need to have somebody show me how to narrow my screen here so I can see the questions that are on the chat.
Is Dewey helping you out with that?
Yeah, he's here. Just a second.
The first question was from Jim Fitzpatrick.
While we're doing, let's see. Oops. You want to repeat the question to me if you can, because while I'm waiting the first question.
Okay. Jim asked 4 questions. First one is ATMO deposition directly to water surface.
Okay, so somebody asked a question online as to whether or not the I can see the questions right now.
Okay.
All right. So the question was, 1, atmospheric deposition directly to water surface. I guess that's the first question. Atmospheric deposition is assumed to be occurring onto land and water. It's calibrated for each of those different drainages. So each of those different drainages that Dina showed in her slide, of which there are 136,000, each of those have an area in square kilometers, and then each of those drainages would have a certain amount of nitrogen delivered to it by atmospheric deposition.
Hi, this is Jim Fitzpatrick. I wonder if I could clarify that. In one of the slides you presented earlier, you showed a watershed, which was, I forget the name of it because the slide went by quick, but it showed the largest portion of the load as being atmospheric, and I guess I was surprised it didn't look like it was a particularly wide river, so that's why I was asking the question.
Okay. All right, let me repeat that to the people here. He was saying that in one of my slides I showed the load apportioned to nitrogen as being quite high, and he just wants to know if that was because of the nitrogen being deposited directly to the stream or as part of the source within the watershed, deposited throughout the watershed, and it is in fact deposited throughout the watershed. So does that answer your question?
Well, you have atmospheric deposition falling on the land and then running off from the land, and I guess I would not consider that. I mean, it's ultimately atmospheric deposition, but I guess when I normally think of it, it's the deposition directly to the water surface, and then whatever falls in the forest and runs off from the forest is, I guess, the forested input. If that was clarifying.
Yeah, that's probably correct. Well, anyway, let me go on to your next question. We can talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
Let's see, various forms of nitrogen. I think that was probably asked already. And let's see, for the base water quality flux model, if there is a wastewater treatment plant present, how do you separate it out from the wastewater treatment plant load file? So I think...
Yeah, and if I can, I'll clarify that. If you're, I think, again, from one of the earlier plots, you have two components that go into SPARROW. There's you generate flow concentration relationships. And I was wondering, in a case where you have a treatment plant or a couple of treatment plants on a reach or a section of a river, and you're calibrating it to it, the data that you're trying to calibrate to already reflect the point source load. So therefore, I was wondering how do you account for that, since you're putting in a separate file the loads that are coming into that stream reach? All right.
I might even punt this one to Dina. If you're calibrating load on a stream, all right, and your water quality sample is going to be reflecting both the nitrogen coming from these various sources plus the source coming from a wastewater treatment plant, then how do you separate out the two? Wait, you want to come? Oh. All right, Dina's going to answer this question.
Hello? Yeah. So the load that's calculated from the wastewater treatment plant is at that point of entrance to the stream at that point. And then we have the downstream site that has a load from a water quality site. It will account also for the load that's coming from the wastewater treatment plant. The way the model deals with it, there's a certain code that's assigned to the load from the point source versus the load from the water quality. And I haven't gotten basically down that route yet, so I'm not sure really how it deals with subtracting them, but I do know that it does account for it also in the water quality side.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any more questions?
We have several more.
Small spatial scale? Well, it doesn't matter really the site. It basically depends on the availability of the water quality data, or the water quality sites, and all the different data that's needed to calibrate to build that model. Of course, once you go on a small scale, then your spatial data that you're getting from a regional or from a national scale model is going to not be very good. So you would have to go in and then get like smaller scale data as far as the spatial data. So looking at Sergo data, for example, versus Statistical data for soils, looking at more detailed land use application. So basically, just going all the way to a smaller scale is your key. There's no scale basically as far as if it's going to work or not. It just depends on the data you're bringing in.
We also have two questions submitted by Martha.
Okay. I didn't hear her because you started talking.
Hi, this is Martha. So I have one of the questions had to do with this concept of atmospheric deposition, and I don't quite feel like you guys addressed it. is your atmospheric deposition all wet deposition, or does it try to include dry deposition?
It also tries to include wet deposition and dry deposition.
Okay, and then how do you guys estimate the transfer of dry deposition to water? What sort of assumptions does the model make?
I'm really not sure about that at this point, really. I'm sorry. I haven't really gotten to building the model itself, and we're just setting up the layers. The data was obtained. We have it. We haven't been in the process of building it yet.
Okay, great. And so the second question was, for a lot of the streams that we have in California, a lot of them are quite flashy, and it seems like the SPARROW model lends itself towards systems that at least flow on a perennial basis. And so how do you think that the SPARROW model works for some of these flashier systems that have a sort of distinct wet weather signal, and then they have a reduced dry weather flow? Have you had any experience using the SPARROW model for Mediterranean type streams?
Well, first thing, like I said, we haven't really built our model yet, but what my understanding is, it's a snapshot of time. So basically, it takes data. It gives you an idea of what's going on in a certain location and average situations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's looking at, 2002. It's not seasonal, so we know that the flashiness happens during seasonal events, right? So it's looking at an average situation in that year with these kind of parameters. What is it going to look at? How is it going to, what is coming out of the model? We can basically, I think we can build a model for, we know that we can build a model for smaller time periods, but it hasn't been really done yet on the bigger time period in order to look at smaller ones yet.
Okay, great. So the last question I had was just a clarification. So right now you're running the model for the major rivers in California. Is there an intent, at least that was my understanding, is there an intent to try to do this for some, is it at this point part of your work plan to try to do other California watersheds that may be smaller, hydrologically speaking?
Yes. The model is being built for the whole state of California.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not only the major river basins that I showed you were only just for references, so you can figure out where we are really in the study area. But
okay.
It's doing the whole. We're doing the scale for the whole California state.
Okay, that's
Except
great.
not Lake Tahoe, because it's not part of the MRBA to basin definition.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question that was submitted by David.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for the people online, we don't. When you talk back to us, we don't have a speakerphone here for the whole audience, so it just comes back to the speaker. But since it's getting a little bit late, maybe I'll go through these last few questions. There was a question about, can SPARROW models sync such as best management practices with variable removal efficiencies for the various constituents? And basically, I think that would probably run into where you would go into these individual drainages and change the input of nitrogen or phosphorus based on what you think your best management practice would be. But I'm not sure if SPARROW would be the most efficient way to handle something like that. But conceptually, you probably could. And let's see. There's something here about Malibu Creek, which is a long question. Okay. So basically asking a question is about a specific location, Malibu Creek, and whether or not there's enough information from our sources to be able to see whether or not the TMDL is being satisfied, especially with respect to geological sources. And I guess that's a good question, but stay tuned. I don't think we could really answer that one today. Let's see, how far along in the project? I did address that towards the end of my talk. We'll be running the model this summer. We'll be running the model during our next fiscal year. and hopefully next year at this time, the model will be going off, or at least our papers will be going off for review. How is the information, another question, how is the information from the base year transferred to loads now? Which, I mean, I think if I understand that question right, what he's saying is if you have a base year, which is 2002, how do you say what's happening in the present? And what you'd have once you have a calibrated SPARROW model, what you could do then is to get new source data. But you can only make predictions as to the year for which your source data exists. So when we finish this model, it'll be a snapshot for 2002. But we would certainly want to be able to do exactly that. Would be to model it for for more recent times. But anyway, that wouldn't be something for now, but it'd be something for the future. So another question: are there future plans for linking SPARROW output with groundwater flow models such as ModFlow? I don't think so. Dina's shaking her head, so we'll just say no and let that one go. But yeah, and surface water and groundwater are two different things. Who cares? All right, and one last question. A number of processes that affect nitrogen are strongly different by temperature. Do the tuning coefficients account for seasonality or temperature? And yes, that is a fact. We do have temperature as one of our source layers, and that is one of the things. That is one of the reasons why we have temperature, is that these coefficients are in fact temperature dependent, and you wouldn't be able to do that without being able to take temperature into account. Okay, well, that was the last question. I think people are probably getting tired, probably getting hungry. I'd like to thank everybody online that listened through this. And hopefully next year we'll come back here and give a talk with a calibrated model, and we'll see how close to reality we are with this.